The silence in our colonial-style home in Silveridge, Connecticut, used to feel like peace. It was the kind of quiet you pay millions for. Thick walls, lush carpets, and the distant hum of a high-end HVAC system. But lately, that silence had changed. It felt like a thick, suffocating fog, the kind that rolls in off the Atlantic and hides the jagged rocks until it's too late. I sat at the mahogany dining table, the same one where we'd hosted a dozen Thanksgiving dinners for the Silveridge elite. I found myself tracing the grain of the wood, remembering when we bought it. We were young, ambitious, and in love. Now the wood just felt cold. I could see my reflection in the polished surface. A man who looked older than his 38 years, with eyes that had seen too many blueprints and not enough truth. I heard the sharp, rhythmic click of heels on the hardwood. Sarah was walking toward me. She wasn't carrying the vintage Bordeaux we usually shared on Friday nights. She was carrying a manila envelope. She didn't sit. She stood over me, the overhead chandelier casting a sharp, artificial glow on her perfectly symmetrical face. She tossed the envelope onto the table. It slid across the polished surface, stopping inches from my coffee mug with a sound like a dry twig snapping. "It's over, Julian," she said. Her voice was devoid of the warmth that had once defined our decade together. It was the voice she used for difficult real estate negotiations, clinical, detached, and final. She leaned against the doorframe, crossing her arms, a sharp, triumphant smirk playing on her lips. She was watching me, waiting for the collapse. She expected the weeping, the begging, the "what did I do wrong?" routine she had undoubtedly rehearsed her rebuttal for. She wanted to see the man who built skyscrapers crumble over a few sheets of paper. I looked down. The bold lettering practically screamed at me, "Petition for dissolution of marriage." But as I stared at the document, I didn't feel my heart break. Instead, I felt a physical lightness I hadn't known in years. For 3 years, I had been the only one trying to keep the embers of this marriage alive while she was already out the door. I looked up at her, meeting those cold blue eyes. I didn't scream. "Finally," I whispered. I reached into my breast pocket, pulled out my heavy fountain pen, and signed my name with a flourish. I didn't even read the terms. I knew what she wanted. The house, the savings, the pride. She could have the first two. And before we go deeper into this story, take a second and hit that subscribe button. Give this video a like, and let us know where you're watching from. I'm curious to know how far these stories travel. To understand why that smirk didn't hurt me, you have to understand the slow, invisible rot of the last 3 years in Silveridge. To the outside world, Sarah and I were the it couple. I was Julian Vance, the architect whose designs were redefining the New England skyline. She was Sarah Vance, the real estate mogul who could sell a shack for 7 figures. We were the image of American success. We had the memberships, the cars, the invitations. But behind the manicured lawn and the designer clothes, the foundation was crumbling. Sarah had grown resentful of my work. She wanted a life of constant adrenaline, of high-stakes galas and international travel. I was a man who valued the quiet work of creation, the blueprints, the structural integrity, the legacy. The more I built for our future, the more she felt trapped by the stability I provided. I started noticing the shifts. It began with the late nights. Closings that lasted until 2 a.m., client dinners in Manhattan that required her to stay overnight. When she did come home, she smelled of expensive bourbon and a heavy, spicy cologne that definitely wasn't mine. I wasn't a fool. I saw the signs. But I lived in a state of hopeful denial. I thought if I just worked a little harder, if I just bought her that vacation home in the Berkshires, she'd come back to me. I thought I could outbuild her unhappiness, not realizing she was already building a life with someone else. And the denial ended exactly 6 months ago. It was a Tuesday, gray and drizzly. I had come home early from a site visit in Hartford because the concrete pour had been delayed. The house was quiet, but Sarah's white SUV was tucked in the driveway. I walked in through the mudroom, intending to surprise her with lunch. I headed upstairs, my footsteps muffled by the thick runner. The door to our master suite was cracked open, just an inch. I stopped. I heard her voice, but she was laughing. A genuine, breathless, intimate laugh I hadn't heard directed at me in half a decade. "He has no idea, Mark," she said, her voice dripping with a playful cruelty. He's so busy drawing floor plans for other people's lives that he doesn't realize his own is falling apart. He's actually investing another $2 million into the Westwood project today. Hey, just wait until the papers are ready. I'm taking every cent, the house, and the firm's reputation. Then I heard a man's voice, a voice I knew as well as my own. He's a good architect, Sarah, but he's a blind husband. By the time he realizes the Westwood project is a legal black hole, we'll be halfway to the Mediterranean. Mark Sterling, my business partner, my best friend since our days at Yale. The betrayal wasn't a sudden stab. It was a slow-acting poison. I didn't burst in. I simply backed away, step by agonizing step, until I was outside. I got into my car and drove. I drove until I reached the Connecticut coast, the Atlantic wind whipping against my face. That was the night Julian the husband died, and Julian the architect of revenge was born. I knew Sarah and Mark were planning to bleed me dry. They thought they were the smartest people in Silveridge. They viewed me as a creative, someone who was good with lines but lacked the killer instinct for business. They didn't realize that as an architect, my entire job is to find the structural weaknesses in a design. For the next 6 months, I played the most exhausting role of my life, the doting, oblivious husband. I bought the flowers. I listened to her lies. I even invested a massive portion of our shared liquid assets into the Westwood development project Mark was heading. On the surface, Westwood looked like a gold mine. In reality, I had subtly steered Mark toward a legal labyrinth of shell companies and high-interest debt. I let him think he was outsmarting me. I watched them exchange secret, mocking glances at dinner parties while I talked about our future. Every time Sarah looked at me with that patronizing pity, I just smiled back. I was building a cage with gold-plated bars, and they were walking right into it. Before we continue, take a second and share your thoughts so far on this story below. I read every single one. If you discovered your partner and your best friend were conspiring against you, would you confront them immediately, or could you stay quiet for 6 months like Julian? Back in the dining room, Sarah's smirk began to falter. The silence was stretching too long. I wasn't angry. I looked like a man who had just been handed a receipt for coffee. "You're not even going to read it?" she asked, suspicion creeping in. "Why bother, Sarah? You've clearly spent so much time and effort on this with Mark," I said, sliding the papers back to her. "I trust your attention to detail." The color drained from her face. How do you know about Mark?" "Sarah, I notice when a foundation is shifting. I notice when a door doesn't hang quite right. The cologne, the investments, the laughter through the bedroom door 6 months ago." I stood up. "I've already moved my personal things. The keys to the SUV are on the counter. Oh, and give Mark my regards regarding the Westwood project. I think he's going to find the next few weeks very educational." I walked out of that house with nothing but a leather suitcase and my laptop. To the neighbors peering through their curtains, I looked like a defeated husband being cast out. But as I pulled my sedan onto the main road, I felt like I had just escaped a burning building. I checked into a small apartment in the city. 2 days later, and the first domino fell. My professional line rang. It was Mark. His voice was high-pitched and panicked. "Julian, where the hell are you? The Westwood funding just got frozen. The lead investors pulled out because of a structural integrity and liability clause in the contract you drafted. We're over-leveraged by $4 million. If we don't fix this by Friday, the bank seizes the assets." "That sounds like a personal problem, Mark," I said, leaning back in my chair. "Since Sarah is now your partner in everything, including the firm's liabilities according to the divorce settlement she insisted on, I'm sure the two of you can figure it out. After all, she wanted everything." "Well, this is part of it. If you were in Julian's shoes, watching the people who betrayed you realize they've inherited a mountain of debt, what would you say to them? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'm curious to know how far these stories travel." Sarah hadn't realized that her greed was her undoing. She had instructed her lawyer to include a clause granting her 50% of all current and future business assets and associated liabilities. She thought she was securing a piece of my future. Instead, she had tethered herself to a sinking ship. I had moved the Westwood project debt into a subsidiary company linked to our joint estate just weeks before the split. I had spent countless nights meticulously shifting the burden of the failing project away from my personal holdings and into the marital pot. Because she demanded equal share in all business liabilities to ensure I couldn't hide money, she had inadvertently signed on to a $4 million deficit. By the time her shark lawyer realized that the assets were outweighed by the debt, the ink was dry. I had a clean slate. She had a $4 million nightmare. A week later, Sarah showed up at my new apartment. She looked like a ghost of her former self. Makeup smudged, hair frizzy from the rain, her expensive coat soaked through. She didn't look like a real estate mogul. She looked like someone who had just seen the end of the world. "You did this," she hissed, pushing into the room. "The bank just called. They're talking about foreclosure on the Silveridge house. They've frozen my personal accounts. How is that possible, Julian? We have millions." "Correction, Sarah. We had millions. But you insisted on being an equal partner in Westwood. And Mark missed the fine print on the mezzanine financing. The project is insolvent. You wanted to be a partner in my success, but you forgot that partnership includes the failures too. You set us up," she screamed, her voice cracking. "I didn't set you up, Sarah. I just stopped being the person who catches you when you fall. You wanted my life? You got it. All of it. Before we go deeper, I would love to hear your point of view. Tell me what part hit you the hardest in Julian's journey so far, and share your thoughts in the comments. Would you have the stomach to look your betrayer in the eye and tell them they brought this on themselves?" The legal battle that followed was the talk of the Connecticut bar. Sarah tried to sue for fraudulent inducement, claiming I had tricked her into signing. But my lawyer, Clara Thorne, was a master of the game. She produced the one-party consent recordings I had made over the last 6 months. The courtroom went silent as Sarah's own voice filled the speakers, laughing about how she was going to bleed me dry and how I was too stupid to see what she and Mark were doing. The betrayal was laid bare in high-definition audio. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Miller, looked over her spectacles at Sarah with pure disdain. In the eyes of the law, Sarah wasn't a victim. She was a predator who had been outmaneuvered by her own greed. The divorce wasn't just finalized, it was a total scorched earth victory. Sarah was left with a house she couldn't afford to heat and a reputation that was effectively radioactive in the high society circles she craved. Mark Sterling's professional life was over before it could truly begin. Westwood was a toxic brand. And because his name was on the primary loan documents, his personal credit was incinerated. He was blacklisted by every major developer in the tri-state area. He came to my office, my sun-drenched new loft, looking like a man who hadn't slept in a month. He wasn't the Yale Golden Boy anymore. He was a desperate man looking for a way out. "Julian, please," he rasped, "just sign the technical waiver. If you testify that the structural flaws were unforeseen, the insurance will cover the debt. I'll give you back everything. I'll testify against Sarah." I looked at the man I had once called a brother. "The foundation was rotten, Mark," I told him. "And I don't mean the building. I mean you. I'm moving on to projects that actually have integrity. I suggest you do the same. I hear they're looking for draftsmen in Scranton. Maybe start there." With the toxic dust of Silveridge finally settling, I did something I should have done years ago. I moved south. I chose Savannah, Georgia. I needed the heat, the history, and the honesty of a city that wore its scars on its sleeve. I opened a boutique firm called Vance and Integrity. I didn't want to design skyscrapers anymore. I wanted to restore the historic homes that had stood for centuries. I heard through the professional grapevine that the Silveridge estate was eventually sold at a massive loss at a sheriff's auction. Sarah had to move into a cramped 2-bedroom rental near the interstate, working a desk job at a local brokerage where no one knew her name. Mark was working for a mid-level construction firm as a glorified clerk, his license under permanent review. Without my floor plans to guide them, while they wandered straight into the dark. A year passed. I was back in Manhattan for a prestigious gala, the gold medal for sustainable design. I was being honored for a project I'd done in Savannah, creating high-end housing that was entirely carbon neutral. As I stood on the balcony of the Metropolitan Club, a familiar scent hit me. "Congratulations, Julian. I saw your face on the cover of the journal." I didn't turn around immediately. I took a sip of my water, feeling the cool air. "Thank you, Sarah." When I finally turned, I saw a woman who looked 10 years older than the one I had left. The sharpness in her face, once so striking, now just looked like exhaustion. The smirk was nowhere to be found. "You look happy," she said, her voice small. "I heard about the firm, and I heard about the woman you're seeing. Elena, right?" "She is," I said, "and she's brilliant." "Julian, I wanted to say I'm sorry, not for the money, but for thinking I could break a man who knows how to build things from nothing. Do you believe Sarah's apology was genuine, or was she just missing the life she threw away? Tell me what part hit you the hardest in my story, and share your thoughts in the comments." "I appreciate the apology, Sarah," I said, my voice devoid of bitterness. "But we both know you're only sorry that it didn't work. You're sorry that the blind husband turned out to be the one who saw everything. You didn't break me. You just forced me to renovate my life. And as any architect will tell you, the renovation is often better than the original build." She looked down at her hands, hands that no longer wore a 4-carat diamond. "Mark and we didn't last a month after the house went. We realized we didn't actually like each other. We just liked the thrill of the secret." "Most secrets are just lies in a better outfit," I said. I turned and walked back into the warmth of the ballroom, leaving her alone in the cold New York air. That was the last time I ever saw her. In the months following that encounter, I spent a lot of time reflecting on the nature of justice. People in Savannah often ask me how I stayed so calm during the collapse. They want to know if I regret being so calculating, so final with that smile. I tell them there is a difference between vengeance and consequence. Vengeance is an emotional outburst. Consequence is a structural reality. If you remove a load-bearing wall, the roof eventually caves in. I didn't pull the wall down, Sarah and Mark did. I just stopped holding it up for them. I didn't destroy their lives. I simply stopped protecting them from their own choices. If you were in Julian's shoes, facing a situation like this, what would you do? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'm curious to know how far these stories travel. My life with Elena, a landscape architect, was built on genuine laughter and shared values. We lived in a house in Savannah that didn't need to impress anyone. It was built of local stone and reclaimed wood, filled with books and drafting paper. We didn't have power couple meetings. We had morning coffee on the porch and long walks through the squares. Elena understood that architecture wasn't just about the buildings. It was about the life that happened inside them. When I told her the full story, she didn't look at me with pity. She looked at me with respect. I realized then that Sarah's smirk was the greatest gift I'd ever received. It was the alarm clock that woke me up from a decade-long sleep. I eventually channeled my experiences into a book titled The Integrity of Space. It wasn't just a textbook. It was a philosophical look at building a life worth living. I wrote about the Westwood Project as a case study in ethical failure. I didn't use real names, but the story of a man who signed his divorce papers with a smile became a modern parable in the industry. I started a foundation to help young designers get their licenses. I wanted to build a legacy that wasn't made of glass and steel, but of opportunity and character. The letters I received from those students are worth more than any commission I ever earned in Silveridge. Looking back at that morning at the mahogany table, I don't see a man who lost his wife. I see a man who found his soul. The divorce papers weren't a death sentence. They were a graduation certificate. Sarah thought she was taking my world, but she was actually handing me the keys to a much larger one. Revenge isn't about making sure the other person suffers. It's about making sure you thrive so completely that their attempt to destroy you becomes the best thing that ever happened to you. Looking at how Julian turned his betrayal into a completely new successful life, what part of his strategy resonated with you the most? Let's talk about it in the comments below. Thank you so much for walking through this journey with me on family secrets and revenge. This story is a testament to the fact that even when the people you trust the most try to undermine your foundation, you have the power to rebuild. You are the architect of your own life, and no one can take your tools away unless you let them. If this story resonated with you, or if you've ever had to find the strength to say finally when a door was slammed in your face, please give this video a like and subscribe to Family Secrets and Revenge. We are dedicated to bringing you cinematic stories that explore the depths of human emotion and the triumph of the truth. We would love to hear your overall thoughts on Julian's story. Did he go too far, Or was his silence the perfect response? Share your perspective in the comments. We read every single one. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next story. Hey, this has been Family Secrets and Revenge. Stay strong, stay vigilant, and remember, your story is yours to design.